Welcome to Adjusted Reality, a podcast series trusted by the adjusted. And it's brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, where we learn from athletes, celebrities, influencers, and healthcare professionals about how to optimize health in a fun, relatable way. Join me, Dr. Sherry McAllister, as we welcome physician, public health leader, healthcare executive, and behavioral expert, Dr. Kyra Bobinet, an award-winning health innovator and thought leader. Dr. Bobinet has an MD from UCSF School of Medicine and an MPH from Harvard University. She belongs to the Stanford School AIM Lab, where she taught on health behavior change, and is the CEO and founder of Fresh Try, a behavioral software based on the latest neuroscience of habit formation and lasting change. Her new book, an awesome read, Unstoppable Brain. It shares groundbreaking neuroscience that reveals how you can overcome the no-do gap and liberate yourself from the cycle of short-term fixes and relapse. What an absolute pleasure to have you today, Dr. Bobinet.
It's really nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So here's where we go with inspiration. And many of our listeners right now, well, they're chiropractic patients. Oftentimes, they're doctors of chiropractic. So we focus on the whole being. And we recognize how important that nervous system, particularly the brain, and a very specific part of the brain that you're going to talk about, which is related to many of the things that cause us to do. Chiropractic actually kind of helps alleviate pain. Unfortunately, we get them when they have pain, which is unfortunate because we'd much rather improve and foster the optimized movement, but we'll get them when they have spinal alignment issues and that it impacts pain. But there's so much more to the brain. And that is why I brought you in today to really talk about very specialized areas of the brain and why you wrote this book. So let's start with the inspired, unstoppable brain. Tell us what inspired you to go this direction.
Yeah. So for 30 years, I have really tracked behavior change, both in myself as somebody who came out of Oklahoma as a high school student addicted to fast food drive-thrus, and also for patients and also for the public from a public health perspective. And, over and over again, I would test the new thing, the latest diet from Duke School of Medicine or Harvard childhood obesity curricula or wearables when those came out, or carrots and sticks, those kinds of behavioral economics kind of things. And every single time, those methods would get short-term results that long-term would relapse. And I became very frustrated with that. And so I started to track what's going on with, long-term behavior change. And something really sparked in my first book. There was 2 studies out only at that time on something called the habenula, which is an area that I never heard of. And most people, unless you're a well-trained neuroscientist or neurologist, you've never heard of this because it's a half centimeter in the middle of your brain. There's two little nuclei, tucked away in there. And it seems like, they were discovered in the late 1800s, but nobody knew what they did until we got fMRI machines. And then we found out in these 2 studies that I wrote into my first book, one was that if we think we failed, this part of the brain turns on. That's fact number 1. Fact number 2 is if we stimulate this part of the brain, we lose motivation. The animal loses motivation to keep going, to keep trying that behavior. And so in animal behavior, there's only approach and avoid. And we knew the approach was dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin and all those good things, the yummy part of things. But we never understood where the avoidance and the freeze of fight, flight, freeze, or the aversion or the reluctance was coming from until now. And so not only is the habenula that location, that it might be just like a synthesis point in the brain, but it also dominates the approach. It has control over dopamine, over serotonin, over the approach. So I was like, this book needs to get the word out that we have just figured out the most powerful behavioral lever or hook in our behavior that controls us or keeps us doing from what we want to do. And my writing of the book was my attempt to get that word out way before 17 years goes by and it somehow makes its way out of PubMed, you know? And so that's kind of where my inspiration was drawn from.
Oh, I love it. You are a visionary. You saw what was needed. And there's nothing worse than knowing things need to change and we have to adjust our reality. And that where you are, knowing after the MRIs came out and we saw the small area of the brain, and it's often the small areas that create the greatest havoc. And, you know, we read the experience that you have in your book and how and why we often try something and fail. And this book particularly kind of made me feel good. It made me feel like now I get it. And I think, Dr. Bobinet, that you did such a masterful way of bringing the audience in and showcasing this area of the brain and how and why the habenula is in that place that, you know, when you know it's stimulated, well, you're in a problem. You're in a problem situation now. And it does change how we look at things. So now let's go into a deep question. How does this relate to behavior change as it relates to healthy habit formation?
Great. Yeah, that's the question, right? That's what everybody wants to know. And we've all seen a million articles. It's like build a healthy habit, morning routine, you know, like little hacks and all these things like that, which is all really great. But let me just like blow everybody's mind, but that there is something below that is actually driving all of that. So number one, habit formation is dependent on neuroplasticity, the ability to change the brain to change itself. And the way it changes itself is that you repeat something over and over again until it is your default. And that's a habit. And anything short of that, I don't care what advertising or marketing tries to convince you, unless the brain changes, nothing changes, you know? So nothing changes, nothing changes. So using that as a first principle, then basically the habenula is the brake pedal to the gas pedal of habit formation. So you could be going, repeating, you know, you're on a streak, you know, you're using an app or you're, you know, copying somebody's routine from Instagram or you're whatever is working for you and you're cruising, or you go to your chiropractor and you have a routine, you have exercises that you're supposed to be doing. And then the second though, that you think you failed at performing that habit, then the habenula turns on and is like, oh yeah. And then the next day you get up and maybe you don't do it. Maybe you start being inconsistent. Maybe you start being a hypocrite, saying that you're going to do it and then not doing it. And then eventually that leads to you avoiding your clinician altogether because you don't want to face them because you feel like a failure, or you're ashamed of yourself, or you're frustrated, whatever the case would be. Failure has a million faces. But any time that we try a habit, expecting that we're not going to hit some sort of like bump or a failure or whatever, and we let that failure land on our brain, we will find ourselves break up with that habit. We will find ourselves stop trying that habit. We get stuck in our habenula being on, in the on position. And so once you know that this is the mechanism in your brain, it's just like driving a car. If you didn't know about the brake pedal and you were just like, had your foot on it and you were like punching the gas, you're like, this isn't going anywhere. This thing is broken. You know, that's what we're doing. We don't realize there's a brake pedal. And now that everybody's going to know about the brake pedal, then we become more expert and skillful at sending enough repetition of the thing that we want to the brain So the brain's like, okay, got it. Roger that. I'm going to now pave the way with all this myelin. I'm going to make it easy. I'm going to make your new default. Instead of having this thumb on top, it'll be this thumb will be the way that you live. And then, you're good to go. So, there's been a fundamental misunderstanding and miscommunication because of the lack of this neuroscience. We didn't have it before. So it wasn't anybody's fault. Nobody was trying to be deceptive, It's that we were ignorant to this brake pedal action and how powerful it is.
It's so beautiful and so well said that if you don't know the brake pedal exists, you are in a constant flux of frustration and full failure mode. So I want to ask you, so Albert Einstein is one of my favorite people. And it comes to this quote that just hit me is, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. It goes back to, you can't fix it if you don't know it's broken, number one. And then it goes to the highlight of, how are you flexible? Are you innovative enough? Can you take the time to listen to Adjusted Reality and listen to an expert like you that showcases that you can change? And you have to involve some of the cognitive processes of the brain. You brought up the beautiful word, neuroplasticity, and that ability to really move into a place where we can have functional stretch. Our brain does grow, and people oftentimes get into that. You can't teach a dog old tricks. That is so not true. And if it was, neither Dr. Bobinet or myself would be here, because we know something very important, which is growth. What doesn't grow dies. And I'd like you, since we kind of got into that reality that the brain has to be trained into understanding what the brake pedal looks like. And then, as we all know, like you did in your book, when you started talking about fast food, you have to learn that this becomes a habit. And there's kind of this ability to know what to do, but you're not moving it into implementation. And you described this as the no-do gap. If you would explain that, and then how does that relate to the chapter that you talked about, which is called, okay, prepare for an audience, it's real, failure disease.
Yeah. So failure disease is when we have these unrelenting habenula moments, where we're carelessly going through our life and we're turning on our habenula. And the chief symptom of our habenula being on is no do. So this is a term in psychology itself. I know what to do, I just don't do it. That's the no do gap. And even if I don't have that gap in one domain of my life, let's say in my career, I'm killing it, whatever, I might have that in my relationship with my partner or my kids or food or whatever, you would say. It's like, where do you have gaps between what you say you'll do or what you say and what you actually do? Because that is your biggest clue that something triggered your habenula to be on. And that is positive, because now we know what to do. We know to neutralize that failure as soon as possible. We're going to take it more seriously. It's not just like, oh, I failed, now I'm going to go watch TV. We have to attune our attention to, oh, I'm not doing what I know I should do. Okay. I used to just blame myself and feel bad about myself. Now I'm like, oh, habenula's on. I'm disempowered. I'm in a demotivated state. It's not that I don't have motivation. It's not that I'm the worst person on the planet. All that stuff is irrelevant now, because we actually can diagnose it properly, right? So now that I know my habenula's on, then I'm like, okay, which of you all failure diseases triggered this? Who's the culprit? Is it a mixture? Like being able to really become self-literate to what turns on your habenula most often and most sensitively is the master power. And my message is like, don't let them take your power, sweetheart. You need to keep your own power. The habenula is like we went to Fez a long time ago because my daughter was overseas for a semester abroad in Europe, and we went to Fez as a family. And there was these camels, and I don't really like this too much, but they have these little rings in their noses, and then they've got a chain, like a rein that goes to the nose. And there's a giant animal being controlled by this little tiny ring, the size of a silver dollar. So, this is the habenula. You can lead people around by their habenula. If you can disempower somebody and make them feel like a failure, even in some small way, maybe disappointment that they didn't find the right shoes that day, that's a failure from the brain's perspective, right? And they don't take it seriously, then you can control them, right? And we're seeing this in general in mass communications, this massive disempowerment that's happening. We are losing the battle with our habenula because we don't know we have one. And so the more we understand what's really going on, the more we know how to protect our power by putting out failure as if it's a fire in your kitchen. You wouldn't just let it burn.
So that is quite an image. And I appreciate looking at it in that way, which is, it is a massive animal, and it is an animal that recognizes it is now being controlled. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I love that you can right away, as a visionary, now say to yourself, I am empowered. I recognize that the habenula has been turned on. I'm going to keep my power.
Right.
I'm not going to let anybody lead me by the ring. No one's going to forget that. And you talked about that failure disease. Is there more that the audience should recognize in that failure disease? Because oftentimes, as we know, when we say something is a disease or a dis-ease, there's symptomology that comes with it. Share with us a little bit about what you learned in the failure disease.
Yeah, so this is a compilation of every patient's voice, every negative self-talk I've ever heard somebody share, right? Whether it was in a public forum or in a private conversation with me. And I started to categorize these just to give us as a human family some sort of framework to start from. And I encourage everybody to make it their own and even discover new, because we're so clever, people can fail in probably a million ways, but generally, categorically, what I found is that failure fits into a couple broad categories. So one is shoulding, I should do this, I should have done that kind of stuff. Another one is, black and white thinking, like, well, if I ate one piece of, one bite of cake, I might as well eat the whole cake, that kind of giving up, that's a failure moment. Another one is I used to be able to, or I used to, in your case, in your field, I used to be able to, bend down and pick up something, and now I can't, that's a failure, right? And not adjusting to the new reality, to your point. And then, there's other ones like imposter syndrome, comparing, one to the other, like, comparing yourself to your past self, but even comparing yourself to somebody on Instagram who is filtered, who's all done up. Like those kinds of things are all disempowering to us as individuals. And it can demoralize it. It can disappoint us. It can, create apathy. Like I said, all of that, it feeds right into the habenula triggers. And I would be really super curious, like, do you have any that you have heard of, or that you think that you creatively are failing in a specific, clever way?
This is a beautiful point as our audience starts to contemplate, where do you feel like you're having these flex points where you turn on that little teeny nucleus. And I want to say what it really is. Think about this little teeny piece in your brain. And your brain is a humongous organ. And yet we're focused on this one piece that changes lives, depresses lives, creates anxiety, depression, sadness, loneliness. You start making up whatever you want to make up. What is it? And I love that, I think for me, it's shoulda, woulda, coulda, right? It's like, I should have done that. I didn't do it. So shoulding myself is my maximum velocity for failure.
Your favorite way to fail. Yeah.
That's right. This is my favorite way to fail. Everybody have a laugh at yourself. If you can't laugh at yourself, who are you going to laugh at? And that's why I love Dr. Bobinet. She's here and she's recognizing that we all are in this human family. We recognize it. And she wrote the book for this very purpose. The book is called The Unstoppable Brain. And I will tell you, it's just beautifully written. And it talks about the new neuroscience that frees us from failure, eases our stress, and creates lasting change. Is that not what we all want? Lasting change. There's a concept in there that I'd like you to go into because it was personally one of my favorites, is the iterative mindset method. How does this, and if I use the word in quotes, cure and change things?
Yeah. So as I opened up with, I spent most of my career studying the sort of normative, mainstream things, all the Fitbits and all the, steps challenges and all of the meal plans and calorie tracking and all those kinds of methods. And as I cover in the first chapter, those are all performative methods, which have their time and place, but we're overusing them in this society because we've made everything performative. Even influencers on social media are like performative, or we're trying to set a goal and if we don't get it exactly right on the exact date that we said we would, or the exact amount that we said we would, guess what? Failure moment happens to the habenula. So quite by accident, I was doing this behavioral project for frontline workers all over the United States. And this is a company that has 1 million employees. And in doing a lot of behavioral interviews with them, what I realized is that there was really, really small group who didn't know each other. These were individuals, but a small percentage of the people that I was studying who were able to get off their medications, were able to reverse their diabetes, were able to lose weight and keep it off, were able to fix their life problems. And they were doing it working 2 jobs, taking care of kids and taking care of their senior parents. So not to idealize them, but they were kind of like these freakishly amazing people. They were geniuses. And I was like, okay, let's figure out what they're doing differently. Like, I want what she's having, kind of thing. Right. And as I started to dig into the data, I tested psychometrics, I tested demographics, I tested all the things. Were they all using the same product? Were they all using the same program? It's the same, that kind of thing. And I couldn't find anything. But then I realized that coding all of their stories, what I realized is they were doing 2 things differently. Number one is that instead of setting a smart, hard, fixed goal, they were setting up an experiment or a practice, like you would practice a sport or another skill. And then the second thing is that when they had any sort of disruption, or maybe non-starter, or they got tired of it and bored of it, or they needed a new challenge, these people would iterate instead of fail. So they were basically rendering themselves protected from their habenula, and they were unstoppable, which is inspired the name of the book. They were the unstoppable ones when everybody else got stuck in their habenula actions.
I love it. You said a lot there that was so incredibly important. First, it was this very beautiful place that a lot of us go to, which is coding. How do we code for success? In the first part was practice. And I have a famous saying that I love when it comes just to posture, Dr. Bobinet, which is practice makes permanent. It creates this really important piece. So when you do practice good posture, make sure you're practicing it well, because it's going to set you up for success in a permanent way. But the second part that is, for lack of a better word, that I really love is sexy: disruption. How do you iterate and protect yourself from the monster under the bed, knowing that you can kind of move through it, and about a turnaround point? The second part that I like, the iterate part, is really fundamentally engaging your ability to not judge yourself. And it's a pivot point. So when you saw this happening with these unstoppable, freakish kind of people, what were some of the things that they did as they iterated that really made it powerful for them?
Yeah. So one example was there was one woman who didn't have money for a gym membership, but she also was really severely obese, and she didn't want to go outside and exercise anyway. So she used soup cans, which, she would eat the soup later on as dumbbells to get started. So that was a really clever hack, like a little clever iteration of combining something unexpected that was affordable that you have to buy anyway with exercise. So, and so other people would, they want to get off soda. And so they would either switch to iced tea, with some, stevia in it, or they'd like the fizz. So they would stay with soda water that's just flavored with a little bit of fruit, like that kind of stuff. It was just like the ingenuity of people trying different iterations. And I think where people get distracted in our current world is that they see somebody who's clever at an iteration and like a morning routine, let's say, or doing one push-up. They're like, oh, I want to do that. But where they get it wrong is that if that's not theirs, if that's not a fit for them, if it doesn't fit their lifestyle or their personality or their pleasure, like they don't get anything out of it, then they're basically copying somebody else's iteration and they're blaming themselves for being a failure at that iteration. So it's really important to realize that iteration has a lot of different forms, and it can switch from like an environmental one to a changing the time of day or changing the amount of time that you spend on it, to location, to do you add people or not? Do you make it, more intense, less intense? All those little dials that you would do to kind of create your masterpiece of what you want to try as your next iteration.
Oh, so in the book, you just nailed it. You said, make your master plan. You're the genius, right? And you have this beautiful anonymous quote in there that really resonated with me. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. Mm-hmm. So as I see this, when you get on a streak, when you get those habits, what you recognize first is you can change. You have neuroplasticity. You can recognize it, but it has to be you. You are the difference. You are the genius. You're not Dr. Kyra. You're not Dr. Sherry. You are you. And it makes it so special. And the fact that you're even here today with Adjusted Reality makes it self-explanatory. You're here because you can, you will, and in some cases you must make changes in your life, adjusting reality. And I'll tell you, you got to get the book to find out more about some of the nuggets of what's in there to kind of help you take that walk of life, take that opportunity to see, feel, taste, and discover what makes you unique and what is going to help you be better. And we're in it together. And that's the beauty of it. None of us get out of this alive. So recognize and build it. And one last question for you. If you were to have one nugget of wisdom for our audience to take away today, what would that nugget be, Dr. Bobinet?
Just that there's no such thing as failure. That
love it.
Everything's an iteration. There's no way you can fail at being you. So you can let that go.
Fantastic. It happens just like that. If you now recognize for the first time in your life, failure doesn't exist. Now, what are the changes you're going to make? You've been freed from the monster under the bed. You've been freed from the disappointment, disillusionment. I can't, because now you can and you will. And I just like to thank you for bringing this important information to the forefront and being able to help people adjust their reality. It is masterful to have this kind of thinking in our world today, from the very young to our silver slippers that are looking at life and just seeing different ways they too can consider how they're going to improve. And every day is a journey. So thank you so very much for your wisdom and your passion today and bringing it to our audience on Adjusted Reality.
You're welcome. And thank you so much for having me.
I want to thank you for tuning in to this Adjusted Reality as we spoke to Dr. Kyra Bobinet about how you can neutralize failure and unleash your inner wisdom and strength. I know there was a lot to discover in this one, but trust me when I say we can solve our problems, but we do need to think of them in a different light. And that quote was brought to you by Albert Einstein that's pushing us forward. How do we make these behavioral changes and then recognize that if your brake is on, does it really matter how much gas you put into this vehicle? And the reality becomes we have the ability to create a neuroplasticity, the flexibility of what our brain will do and how it will do it if we start to recognize how it works. Once you uncover the secrets, you begin to utilize the wisdom that comes from uncovering those secrets. And that is why I love the Adjusted Reality audience. You're doing more, you're pushing farther, and you're creating the lifestyle you want and you deserve. Now, don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and family. It was brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. And as a special gift for listening today, you can visit cp.org/health. And you can get a copy of our Chiropractic Care, a natural approach to health at every stage of life ebook. And again, I'm going to ask you, share. Sharing is caring. Don't forget to subscribe. This podcast can be shared with family and friends. Anyone who needs a Habanula event happen in their life and recognize it, rate and review. Now, if you're so feeling inspired, you can learn more about chiropractic or find a doctor of chiropractic near you. You visit cp.org/find a doctor. We appreciate your support and showing up to these Adjusted Reality episodes so you can make your world a better place. And we look forward to checking in with you again soon.